Hi, this is Glenn Crothers from the Louisville Jazz Society, and today I'm really pleased to talk to Ryan McGillicuddy, who will be bringing his band RPM to the Café on Sunday, May 25th at 7 p.m., and it's part of the Louisville Jazz Society signature series. Hi, Ryan. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to do this, Glenn. Good to talk to you.
Great. Well, you've had a varied and well-traveled musical career from Maine, where you started, to the University of North Texas, and then to Los Angeles for a few years, about a decade or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then to Korea for a bit, and then finally to Kentucky and Moorhead State University, where you are presently associate professor of music and double bass and the sort of sheet music, apparently. Uh,
Yeah.
So, can you tell me, growing up in Maine, rural Maine, as I understand it, how did you first get interested in playing jazz music?
Well, I had a father who was a band director, and when I was in fifth grade, he had a ninth grader, a freshman in high school, that was playing bass, and he needed a bass player. He knew he was going to need a bass player in 4 years. And so he started me playing bass when I was in fifth grade, which I didn't want to play. If I had my preference, it would have been drums. But he kind of forced that upon me. And I realized pretty quick what a great instrument it was, because I remember I was going into concert band with this thing that looked like a guitar, and everybody was like, wow, you got the cool instrument. And then, along the way, I ended up, I became like a very good sight reader on electric bass, and that turned into a scholarship at a jazz camp one year, and that was when I was in seventh grade, and that's really kind of what turned me on to the pathway of jazz. When I was at that jazz camp in Maine, there was all these great jazz musicians from around the country, and a couple of them taught at North Texas, and that was kind of my direct line to going there as a student. But that camp included some really some jazz greats like Chuck Finley on trumpet. There was George Garzone on saxophone. Ben Street played bass. So there was all these really heavy jazz musicians, and at the time, I knew they could play well, but I was really much more interested in rock and roll music at the time. If I had my druthers, I would have been a famous heavy metal bass player. That's the career I wanted when I was in 10th grade. But along the way, like you
I
mentioned,
hear the money's a little better than jazz.
probably, but yeah, along the way, I ended up going to North Texas,
Right.
which turned out to be a wildly great choice. And it wasn't so much a choice that I looked at the school and I thought, oh, I want to study jazz at North Texas. I just thought I wanted to get as far away from Maine as possible. And I wanted to go to a good music school. And I
Right.
wanted to study jazz because the best musicians I knew were jazz musicians. And so I ended up going to North Texas,
Well,
which was
how did your time there shape your playing and your musical trajectory?
well, in North Texas, they really teach you how to read. So the first thing that happened to me when I went to North Texas was, when I lived in Maine. Maine is a very small state. It's like about a quarter of the size population-wise as Kentucky, and I was kind of, a pretty heavy musician, if you will, in the state of Maine. Like I would go to All-State, I'd be like the first chair bass player in the jazz band every year, but there weren't many bass players trying out. And, I was very much humbled when I went to North Texas. I remember they have these things called lab bands. And at the time, they had 9 lab bands plus another 3 ensembles. And in each ensemble, they had 2 bass players. So there's about, room for about 20 bass players in their bands. And so I remember I auditioned the first week I was there to get placed in a band. And they go from the 9 o'clock to the 1 o'clock, the 1 o'clock being the best band. And I remember auditioning and then looking at the results of the auditions, and they had posted them on a bulletin board. And I just remember going, first I went to the 1 o'clock band. I'm like, surely I must have made the 1 o'clock. And so I looked at the 1, I wasn't there. I looked at the 2, I went down the line, and I got down to the 9 o'clock, and I didn't see my name. So I thought, oh, I must be so good that they put me in a special band. Which was not the case. The case was that I didn't make a band at all my first semester I was there, which was very humbling. And I mean, it really geared me up for the North Texas experience because it's a sink or swim experience, or it was when I entered. And I just practiced as much as I could and played as much as I could with as many musicians as possible, and I got better and better. And the second semester I was there, I made a band, and then I started kind of working my way up. So
Right, right. Sounds like a great experience. I mean, as you said, humbling at first, but ultimately really enriching.
yeah, definitely it was.
So, what made you decide? When you think of jazz meccas, you think New York is the obvious place to go. What made you decide to go to LA?
Well, the initial idea was when I moved to LA was that I was going to get a doctorate at USC. I was accepted to University of Southern California, and I went out there under the auspices of to be quite honest, I wasn't excited about getting a doctorate or doing my doctorate. I was more excited about studying with John Clayton, who's a legendary jazz bass player and classical bass player. And so he was the teacher at USC. So I was like all in on that. I just thought, wow, this guy is one of my heroes. My favorite bass player of all time is Ray Brown. The
Oscar
godfather.
Peterson's.
Yes, yeah, the godfather of bebop bass playing, and so the lineage of Ray Brown goes right straight through John Clayton. John Clayton studied with Ray and was a close friend of Ray's. And, I had listened to all of Clayton's recordings and his recordings along with, he's done some recordings with Ray Brown. And so I was just really excited to study with him. And so I ended up going out to USC, which is in the middle of Los Angeles, and studying with him. And I mean, to be honest, when I studied with him, that again was another rude awakening. Like, I was under the assumption that we'd just be studying jazz, but he realized my classical bass playing was pretty horrendous at the time. And so I would go into a lesson with him and we'd spend about 45 minutes just bowing and playing classical stuff. And then the last 10 or 15 minutes, he'd usually have me do a transcription or play a little bit of jazz bass for him. And that's how our lessons went. But I learned, he was just the most incredible teacher. I learned so much from him, and just a beautiful human being. And the kind of the turning point for me was, I'd spent one semester there at USC doing my doctorate, and I wasn't very happy doing it. And so I did one semester. And then in the winter break, I did a tour in Japan with a band I had been playing with from Texas. And we spent like about 2.5 weeks in Japan, and it was an amazing experience. So anyways, I came back, started my spring semester with John, and I went into my first lesson, and John said, how was your break? And I said, oh, it's great. And I just went into told him about the tour I had been on. And he just looked at me and he just said, why are you doing this doctorate? And he's like, man, you just need to get out there and play. Mm-hmm. And so I spent one more semester. I finished out that semester at USC, but then I kind of took his advice and just started playing in the area. And it was tough at first. It was just taking all the gigs that came my way. I remember doing like a 6-hour gig for $40, but I would say within a few months, I was kind of on my feet. I was paying dues for a while, but like within a few months, I was able to pay rent with the gigs I was doing. And then it's just, I just kind of immersed myself in that scene. And just like going from Maine to North Texas was a big jump to a bigger pool. Going from North Texas to Los Angeles was a jump to an enormous pool. And the quality of musicians out there was incredible. Like I got to play with played occasionally with the Bill Holman band. I did a tour with the Ellington band. Yeah. Did some playing with, Peter Erskine. He was on my album. I was in Russ Ferrante's trio for a while. But then, the kicker for me, it's like when sometimes you stand back and you're like, oh my God, this is like a dream come true. I was a huge fan of the Bill Evans trio when I was a kid, or not a kid, but when I was at North Texas. And then I started finding myself, on gigs with Joe LaBarbera, and who was one of his, former drummers. And I was like, just pinching myself, like, this is amazing, and on some gigs with Marty Morell, and I just, it was just like one of those things where you're like, man, this is why I do what I do. It was just incredible to get a chance to play with these masters.
Right. And learn so much from them, I guess.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So, since you've been in Moorhead, you've also established a whole bunch of musical relationships with musicians here in Louisville. Can you talk a little bit about some of the musicians you played with here from the Louisville?
Oh, sure.
area?
Yeah. I mean, those are some of my favorite musicians in the world. I think the first year I was here, Jacob Duncan, the alto saxophone player from Louisville, he called me up to do a gig, and I'm not even sure how he got my number, but we were at North Texas at the same time. We really never played together at North Texas, nor were we friends. But I mean, it's that big of a school, but we knew each other's names, and I remember him. He was a much better musician than I was at that time, and I remember looking up to him quite a bit, and so he asked me to come down and play. He had this trio gig at the Knock Bar in Louisville. And so he asked me to come down and do that.
Yeah, I've been there.
And he told me, he's like, yeah, I play with this really great drummer. His name's Mike Hyman. And so I said, okay, great. And, you're a Louisville musician. So it was quite an experience. Mike is a force of nature. When you play with Mike, you're in for something that is utterly original, in the best possible way, And I just remember just from the first few notes that I was playing with Mike, I was like, oh my God, this is incredible what I'm hearing behind me. It was something that was unexpected, which is for me, like one of my favorite things in jazz and creative music is when you hear the unexpected behind you and you have to kind of react to it. And Jacob plays that same way too, and he's very open and very free and listens to what's going on, So Jacob and Mike, and then of course, I've had a number of pretty much all the people at U of L I've played with. I was able to do the Jamie Ebersol Summer Jazz Workshop a number of years, and so I got to know a lot of the musicians that actually taught at U of L who worked at that camp. But of course, I've been on gigs with the incredible Dave Clark and Anson Banks, incredible musicians. Now Marlon McKay, who teaches there at U of L, Terry O'Mahony, of course, I'd be remiss not to mention Jamie Aebersold, who's really New Albany, I guess, but
he's a Louisville institution.
Yes, he's no less than a jazz saint, I would say. I mean, he's done incredible things for our university, and the guy he's just an amazing musician. It's in addition to being an incredible human being and philanthropist, he's just an incredible jazz musician. And who else,
well, you're playing now with Gabe Evans.
Gabe Evans.
So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the origins of the RPM quartet that will be playing this Sunday.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the RPM quartet that I'm doing, last year, or I guess it's been about 2 years, I started playing a lot more electric bass. And that electric bass was the bass that I grew up on. And, I kind of put it aside. And then when I lived in Los Angeles, even though I occasionally did an electric gig, most everybody there that I played with who knew me as an acoustic bass player. And same here in Kentucky, I've established myself as an acoustic bass player. But really, I at heart, I'm an electric player. That's what I started on. And what was odd to me is a couple of years ago, I picked it back up and it was an instrument that I hadn't practiced at all, for over 30 years, and so I started playing it again, and I was just really inspired to start writing music for that instrument and that instrumentation. So the group RPM really focuses more on kind of groove oriented jazz. And I would say if you wanted to, think of a group that I try to emulate, it would be like the John Scofield group, like a little more groove based, funk overtones. And even, John Scofield stuff with Medeski, Martin, and Wood, it's that kind of groove based. I try not to, like in the compositions that I've written, I try not to dumb anything down. I think it's still very much jazz harmonies, but it's rooted more, I would say, in dance music or like it's just groove oriented music. So when I decided to record this project, I really wanted Gabe to play electric piano or play his Nord. And on the recording, he ends up playing some Rhodes as well as organ. And so it's a very different flavor for me. It's, something that I really very much enjoy playing and listening to. For me, it's like, over the last couple of years, I've done a lot of listening to Larry Goldings and a lot of listening to, even like Nate Smith and these jazz musicians that are doing more, or even Snarky Puppy, jazz musicians that are doing a little bit more groove-based music.
Right. So who else is in the band? Gabe, yourself, and
Gabe plays keyboards, and then myself, and then Glenn Ginn, who teaches guitar here at Morehead State. I almost said North Texas, who teaches here at Morehead State. He incredible guitar player. And this is a funny side note, but like when I was a freshman at University of North Texas, Glenn was actually my teacher. He was, I played in a guitar ensemble. I played bass for this guitar ensemble, and Glenn was the graduate assistant who was assigned to the ensemble. So he was technically my teacher back then. And then, so Glenn plays guitar. And then Nick Diedrichson, who is local here, but he gigs all over the state and tri-state area, if you will. Nick Diedrichson plays drums. And the way this whole project really came about was Glenn and Nick and I, every Thursday, including this Thursday tonight, we do a regular gig here in Morehead. I started writing music for that group. And I made it a point every week to bring one or two new compositions to the group, and I would kind of test run them with those two guys. And so we've really developed a rapport. And I wanted those two guys on the recording because they're such great musicians and they know the material very well.
So this will all be original stuff.
It's all going to be original. Yeah, we might throw in one or two standards, but it's going to be for the most part all original. Yeah,
it sounds great. I love the references to Medeski, Martin, and Wood, and John Schofield. I'm really looking forward to hearing the kind of I've heard samples. I've never heard a full song, so I'm really looking forward to hearing the kind of groove based sound that you guys have put together. Well, thanks so much for talking to me today, Ryan. Again, we really look forward to hearing your band RPM this Sunday night. Again, just to remind everybody, this Sunday, Ryan McGillicuddy and RPM will be playing at the Café, and that's Sunday, May 25th, 7 p.m. That's part of our Louisville Jazz Society Signature Series. Our shows have been filling up. They've been well attended, so I urge you or encourage you to get your tickets at the LJS website as soon as you can. That's louisvilljazz.org. And thanks, Ryan, again, for talking to me today. It's a real pleasure.
You bet, Glenn. Thanks for having me.